Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we got ourselves a track from an act named Strigz titled Death Penalty. And if we switch over to here we have ourselves a track on YouTube. Here we got the fish with the cigarette. We're going to listen through this track from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. We're also going to be giving this a score out of 10 at the end based on various musical criteria, but let's go, let's do it.
I just got a death penalty. Oh no.
Okay.
There's no more plasticity. Is a bit too sexy.
It's kind of wonderfully a little bit avant-garde, isn't it?
There is a sunflower that's a happy stranger. Timing into horn up a mixture to include our next generation. Oh no, I just got a death penalty.
Funky bass line though, for sure.
I'm stabbed by a mammoth's tusk in the middle of the goddamn snow. My shoelaces are really fucked, but I'll tie them into a goddamn ball.
I'll try not to pause too much. Really kind of spicy tone on those clean leads on the guitar.
Oh no, I just got a death penalty. Oh no, there's no more plasticity. Is a bit too sexy. Oh no, I just got a death penalty.
I mean the panning there as well, just having things on different sides like that. Yeah, this is a fascinating song, but we're going to talk about it more in the conclusion. And so welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Strigz titled Death Penalty. Now this is the tricky one. I'm not quite sure what this is about aside from the inference or them blatantly saying that they've just got a death penalty. They talk about getting stabbed on a mammoth tusk at one point. They talk about getting sort of like spun into a bow, but including the next generation as well. So I'm wondering if it's like the snow melting and getting sort of like getting killed by the mammoth tusk, getting pierced. I'm not sure what the gyrating part being a bit too sexy is. Maybe they got the death penalty because there was no plasticity and the gyrating was a bit sexy. Maybe their death penalty for gyrating too well is that they get stabbed. I'm not, not sure. It's kind of a very sort of quirky feeling where I think I'd probably need more context to understand it. Outside of that, I think that I just want to mention that the song got a overall score of 7.1 out of 10, which I think is a really solid score. You know, it's a solid, really sort of solid first impression to Strigz's work. You know, I think across the board, a lot of stuff was really good. I think one of the things I want to sort of talk about off the gate is actually the studio production, the sound design there. Like immediately, it's partly the way that things are panned. You have like these kind of scraping sounds and percussive hits on either side of the stereo field there. There are parts where you have keys on one side or cymbals directly on the other. We explore the stereo field really well, and that's a deliberate decision in post, which I think makes the track more interesting because a lot of it is kind of unexpected. There are more sort of fundamental elements that make sense. So the vocals being in the center of the stereo field, as well as the bass and the kicks and snares and stuff like that. So we clearly understand what we're doing. I think it is more to sort of provide a sort of a semi sort of unique experience with it. And I think starting to track with those textures on the sides was just a really kind of like cool thing to sort of like kick things off with. It helps as well that regardless of whichever instrument layer we have, because there's a lot, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on. I usually talk about like a few things I like, as well as some like applicable constructive critique, but the leveling and the EQing of different elements, niching within the frequency spectrum was solid. And so ultimately I think it's a great sort of well polished and metered effort. And I think that the way the vocals sound from a post-production perspective is solid. They aren't too overcomplicated in post. There aren't sort of like huge effects chains in it. There are double takes and sort of main takes, and they're EQ'd and compressed well. So yeah, the post-production, the studio work is good. I think it's also just to talk about the vocals, because usually I just start with those. I think there is a very sort of conversational, accessible tone to them. We do sing sometimes, some parts are more sort of like spoken with melody, and I appreciate that. I think it's accessible. There's nothing in the song which I think is trying to sort of catch you by surprise or be a bit disingenuous or obsequious. It's a song where you kind of, what you hear is what you get. I think that like in the gyrating parts, we go into the falsetto, even if there's not a complete amount of enunciation there, I do like the roundness of that tone. You know, like there is a fullness in part because of the double tracking there are moments, and we do clearly understand how to sing. So I think a lot of that is captured really well with the vocal takes, either by themselves or stacked, and they harmonize neatly with the rest of the arrangement, note-wise and key-wise. And again, like as I mentioned, I like the fact that we play with positioning, like the vocals in the center, the E, D, D, and like we'll go specifically asymmetrically to the left. It's like, oh, why is this here? You know, some backwards and forwards as well. So the story is told, and the post-production is good. And then we just have the instrumental layers there with a relatively, you know, like palatable bass motif, bum ba bum bum ba bum, that kind of like vibe there, and you sort of build upon that with a variety of different drum beats with quarters, eighths, and sixteenths in there, and with variation to those rhythms as well, especially on some of the hi-hat sections. The bass being more of a constant with the eighth note groove there, working between arpeggios and bass notes or root notes. But I think it's a combination with sort of like, I think this combination of less predictable, less familiar textures and timbres, like the kind of scraping or the kind of old percussion sounds at the start, with again the keys being far more sort of like, I understand how this works and how this is meant to sound. The fusions there are tight. I mean, there's a bit of sharpness to the tone of the guitars around that 1:53 mark, but I still think they kind of stand out more. It's just a nice kind of adjustment from the relative fullness of the tone of some of the other sort of like key bass elements prior to that. And because it's kind of riffing on this sort of Phrygian flat second motif, it's minor, but the upper register makes it kind of a similar level of intensity to the lower bass notes, but just in their respective range. And to be fair, as I'm hearing through this, there are adjustments to the bass line. There just seems to be like a key signature that we're very loyal throughout. And a lot of the vocals do kind of like work along with some of the piano lines, so the keys on the right hand will mirror some of the notes of the vocalist to sing, and they'll feed off of each other really the way it's satisfying. And just again, I'm finding little things as we just flick through just to make sure I haven't missed anything. The whistling that you have in that midsection there is just a nice foil vocally on the mic to what we had with the main sort of story being told in the overdubs. So ultimately, I think what made this track was special was the post-production, the vocal performance, and the way it was expressed and performed, you know, with competent head and chest voice there. And it's the choices on the various instruments and the way we characterize them independent of each other, as well as how we amalgamate them in the mix. There's nothing here that I feel would improve this track by making it better. It's just a very kind of quirky, I think it's part of it is the story that we're trying to tell here. I can't necessarily figure out how things are connected. If I had more time with it, maybe, but on a first listen basis, it's just very curious. But I kind of like the fact that it's making you think. And that's effectively my review of this track from an act named Strigz titled Death Penalty. And hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show him some love via the various social medias and the YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with crazy stuff going on in the world. And I will catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.